Hey everyone, Digital Scriptorium here, and today I want to show off how to install Debian 13 Trixie step by step from start to finish. This video will be showing a minimal aka command line install best suited for a server. However, I will have other guides on my channel showing off desktop environments being installed as well, should you want something different. At the time of making this video, Debian 13 Trixie is in the release candidate phase. However, the official release will be on August 9th, 2025. If you are viewing this video before that date, you can feel free to take the plunge now and just do a software update to be on the official release version when it does come out, which is no big deal. This guide is intended as a general use case installation of the operating system. I'm going to show off system requirements, how to create the bootable media, and then how to install the operating system. I won't be going into specific application usage as that is outside of the scope of my guide today. However, you can certainly feel free to take a look at my various Linux server guides I have on my channel to utilize this specific operating system type. All the links I show off I will include in the description below so you can easily find them if need be. One disclaimer I just want to mention is a warning that this is an operating install guide where I completely remove the previous operating system. As with any operating system, you might run into unforeseen issues, so you have to go into this with an open mind that issues might spring up. Worst case, you can always attempt to install a different operating system back on. If you need help, I have many different Windows and Linux guides to accomplish this on my channel. Before I begin, I also just want to mention that if you're feeling generous to think about donating to support my channel on either Ko-Fi or Patreon, every bit goes right back into making new guides. Alright, with that all said, let's dive in. So first off, let's talk about minimum system requirements. So the minimum hardware requirements are pretty lean for Debian in general. The key thing to really look for is what you're really trying to get out of it. So for instance, if you're opting for the no desktop option, then minimum RAM is 256 megs of RAM, recommended is 512, and then 4 gigabytes of hard drive space. Whereas if you choose a desktop environment, then you want 1 gig of RAM, 2 gigs recommended, and then 10 gigs of hard drive space. As far as the processor goes, it basically says a Pentium 4 1 GHz system is minimum recommended for a desktop system. And then it also mentions as far as a server-based usage case that it's basically impossible to give a general memory or disk requirement because of what the server would potentially be used for. My general rule of thumb is if you can get by with at least a dual-core processor this day and age, that certainly helps. And then 2 gigs of RAM, definitely minimum, and then just whatever hard drive space you can throw at it, basically. Solid-state drive, of course, will speed things up, so it'll be much peppier, but you can still get by with a mechanical hard drive these days on Debian. So at least at the time of making this video, Debian 13 is still just a release candidate. However, I want to show, if you watch this video on or after August 9th of 2025, then the way to download Debian 13 would be as follows. So on Debian's main website, if you click on the download link on the right-hand side, then it would immediately start downloading Debian 13 if it was actually released. I'll go ahead and click cancel for this right now. Now, if you're watching this video before August 9th and you want to download Debian 13, then you can follow these steps. So on the release candidate 2 download link, which I'll have in the description below, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, and then select the last option and just click on that, and then just wait for this to download, and then we will continue on. So next we need a utility that is going to work the magic in making a bootable USB thumb drive for us utilizing the ISO that we downloaded. This is where Rufus will come in handy. You could use other utilities such as Etcher, or there's a few others out there, but however, Rufus is the one that I prefer as it's the simplest. It doesn't require having to be installed at all. It's a standalone executable that you just download and run. So to download Rufus, if we scroll down about a quarter of the way down the page, then you'll find the download section. Most users are going to choose this top one and then just find the latest and greatest version, which should be here, and that should get the job done. However, just to mention, there is also a 32-bit version, aka the x86 variant, and then you can also use the Windows on ARM variant if you wanted to at the bottom. There is the portable version, however, I have not found a use for that, so at least for the sake of this video, I'm downloading this top version, and it's only 2 megs, so it should download pretty fast. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to do open show in folder. I'm just going to minimize the downloads folder for right now. We can close out of the browser that you're using to download everything. We don't need that anymore. At this point, go ahead and plug in your USB thumb drive. I recommend at least a 4 gig thumb drive, if not larger. If you do not have a USB thumb drive on hand, I will have recommended inexpensive thumb drives listed in the description below that you could go with, and they will get the job done. So anyhow, I'm going to plug my USB thumb drive in, and then we will continue on. So I've got my USB thumb drive plugged in. Before we do continue on with Rufus at this point, I do want to go through one extra step, and that is that I've noticed with both Windows 10 and Windows 11 that Windows Defender is very iffy when in regards to Linux-based ISO images being built onto thumb drives. The problem is that it sees that it's operating system files, and it believes that they are malicious. This is a false positive that it's snagging those files and basically Pac-Manning them or eating them as they're trying to make their way onto the thumb drive. So what I found is that you will build up a thumb drive and either it will error part of the way through building the thumb drive, or you get to the point of actually installing it on the machine that you want to install it on, and then you start running into really weird errors, or it starts getting slow, or it starts freezing. So I'm going to show you the steps to temporarily turn off real-time protection for Windows Defender. This is not going to permanently damage it in any way. Like I said, this is just temporary. What's basically going to happen is we're going to turn it temporarily off, which buys us about roughly 15 minutes, or until the next time the machine gets rebooted, then Windows Defender will turn back on. So we do partially have to act kind of fast on this. However, we do have a good amount of buffer to get everything built up before Windows Defender were to turn back on. The steps I'm going to show are practically the same in both Windows 10 and Windows 11, so let's go through that now. So go down to the Start menu, and then type in Windows Security. And you should see Windows Security pop up. Let's click on that. Next up, click on Virus and Threat Protection. And then under Virus and Threat Protection Settings, click on Manage Settings. And then this is the section right here that we need to toggle off. So real-time protection, toggle the on to off. You're going to get the UAC prompt. Select yes for this. That's okay. And then we're going to get a little pop-up balloon on the bottom right-hand corner basically saying, hey, something's going on with Windows Defender, and it's just basically giving us a warning. That's perfectly fine. We can just click the X for that, and we can close out of this at this point. So next up, let's go to our downloads folder or wherever you stashed Rufus. So once again, make sure your USB thumb drive is already plugged in before you click on Rufus. So at this point, let's double click on Rufus, select yes for the UAC prompt. And then the first thing that we need to get through is we need to make sure that our thumb drive is actually being detected in the devices section. If your thumb drive is not showing up here, then I would recommend unplugging the thumb drive, give it a few seconds, plug it back in just to reseat it, see if it shows back up. If it doesn't, you can leave the USB thumb drive plugged in, reboot the machine, and then see if it shows up then. Worst case, if it still doesn't show up, then we can manually format it to see if it would maybe play nice for us. And if you do need to manually format it, all you have to do is go to this PC, find your thumb drive, highlight it, right-click on it, select Format, and then you can name it whatever you want. Just one thing also to mention is that when you go to format the thumb drive, it is going to nuke all the data on it. So if there's anything you need to back up, please back it up before you continue this process. And then you would just click Start. If Quick Format is not checked, check it. And then you can just click Start. It'll warn you saying, hey, it's going to delete all the data that's on this thumb drive. You click Yes, as long as you backed up what you need. And then try to relaunch Rufus if need be. So I'm going to go back to the Downloads folder and with Rufus open. So in my case, my thumb drive is showing up on the top, so that's perfect. Next up, let's click on the Select button and then find where Debian 13 was downloaded to. And then once it's been located, in my case, it's just in the Downloads folder, so it made it nice and easy. And then we can click on Open. And then let's close out of everything that you might have open. I'm a big fan of making sure that there is absolutely nothing else running on the machine while we build up the thumb drive. Sometimes people web browse and stuff like that, or they might even fire up a game or some application, and there is always an off chance that it might corrupt some data as it attempts to build the bootable thumb drive. I leave everything as is for defaults, and we're leaving it all up to Rufus to work the magic. The key thing is, before we click on start, once again, this is just a warning that if there is any data on the thumb drive that you need to back up, please back it up now, as it will be formatted and wiped before it puts all the data on that we need for Debian. So just a warning. So we'll click on start. Rufus is mentioning this is an ISO hybrid image detected. We're going to leave it as the recommended option. Click on OK. And then it's popping up mentioning that it needs to download some files. And we're going to select yes for this. And again, it needs to download some files. Select yes once more. And then here's the warning that it's going to destroy the data on the thumb drive. So once again, make sure that you have everything you need off the thumb drive before continuing. In my case, I don't have anything, so I'll click on OK. And then at this point, just be patient as it works its magic, and then we will continue on. Now, if all goes well, then we should be seeing a green ready state. If an error pops up, then my recommendation is just try again. The other thing is that if it continues to error, then I would reboot the machine, make sure that Windows Defender is still turned off, once again, because it will automatically turn back on with a reboot. So just go through those steps that we did previously, and then try it again. If it's still erroring, it might be worth re-downloading the ISO. If it still errors, it might be worth trying a different USB thumb drive. So you have a few different options if it errors out. Anyhow, at this point, everything looks good. So I'm going to click on close. Next up is going to be the somewhat difficult part of the whole process, and that is getting the machine to actually boot off of the thumb drive. You do have a few options that you can choose. One way to do it is that you can Google your exact make and model of your machine, and then figure out which key you need to press in order to get the machine to actually boot off of the thumb drive. The other option is that if you're on Windows 10 or Windows 11, there is a method to get the machine to go into a recovery state, which would allow you to select the USB drive if you wanted to. So if you wanted to do the recovery option in Windows, all you have to do is go to Start, Settings, System, and then scroll down a little bit until you see the recovery section. You can click on recovery, and then you can have the option for advanced startup, in which case you can click on restart now, and then it will give you an option to select the USB thumb drive or whatnot. So that's one option. I'm just going to go ahead and reboot my machine, and I'm going to mash the special key from my machine, which at least in my case, it's F12, but it could be the F2 key, the F4 key, F6, F8, F10, F12, the delete key. So a whole bunch of different options to choose from. Once again, just Google your exact make and model to figure out what the magical key would be, or use the Windows recovery option that I showed off. So anyhow, I'm going to reboot the machine, and then I will mash the special magical key to get us there. I'm going to start mashing the F12 key, at least for my machine. Not all Lenovo's are this key, but that at least is the magical key for mine. Now, not all machines are also going to display exactly the same as this one. However, if you see something along the lines of USB HDD or USB hard disk drive, or it might say USB virtual CD drive, or it might even say USB thumb drive. But basically locate that, in which case hopefully it actually shows up for you. And then with it highlighted, then just hit enter. And then we will wait for it all to load up here. I just want to show that the first screen does give some options. By default, it usually kicks off the graphical install. There is a basic install option that you can choose. There's advanced options. There's the accessible dark contrast installer menu. And then you could also install it with speech synthesis if you really wanted to. I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that we select the graphical install, at least for the sake of this video. We'll hit enter. And then just be patient as it loads up. A lot of the peppiness and how fast this loads is of course dependent on the hardware that you've got the USB thumb drive plugged into, and also how fast the USB thumb drive itself is. So once again, really comes down to which hardware is matched with which hardware. Anyhow, the very first page that will pop up is going to be your language selection screen. So choose the language that you need, In my case, I'm going to leave English, so that's fine. I'll click on continue. Next up is the select your location screen. So select your location, and then you can continue on. I'm just going to leave mine as the United States. That's fine. Click on continue. And then next up is going to be configure the keyboard. Once again, choose whichever keyboard you're utilizing. I'm going to leave mine as American English, and I will click continue. And then just be patient as it works. It's some magic at this point, and it's going to go through a series of different screens, but just be patient. At this point, one thing I do recommend, if possible, is plug your machine into a Ethernet cable if possible. The alternative is if you have a wireless controller in your machine that you could connect it to wireless to continue on. So once again, prioritize, if possible, plug it into Ethernet. If it's not possible, you can select wireless and you can go through the steps of connecting it to a wireless network. In my case, I do have wired Ethernet available, so I'm going to choose that and I'm going to click continue and then just be patient. And then next up is going to be the configure the network screen. Now this is the host name or computer name prompt that you will be asked to put something in. You can name this machine whatever you want. In my case, I'm just going to name it something generic. I'll just name it that and we'll click continue. And then next up, if you are connecting it to a domain, then you would be able to type in the domain name here. Most users are not going to have a domain, so you can just leave it as local domain and then click continue. Now this is optional. However, you could type in a password for the root account here, and that would enable the root account. Now, some people prefer to disable the root account for security reasons. If you decide to not utilize a root account, then you could leave these options blank, in which case when you go to create your user, then your user is given sudo capabilities, or basically administrative privileges. In my case, I am going to go ahead and create a root account, but once again, it's completely optional. So once again, if you want a root account, type in a password here. If you do not want a root account for security reasons, leave the two password fields blank and then click continue, and that will disable the root account. But anyhow, like I said, I'm just going to create a root account for the sake of this video, and then I'll click continue. And then next it's going to ask for an actual user account to be created for non-administrative capabilities. Now, like I said, if the root account if you do not type in a password for the root account, then this user account that you create is actually going to have administrative capabilities. So go ahead and type in a name and then click on continue. And then generally it selects the first name that you type in. In my case, it says digital, and that's perfectly fine, but you can feel free to change it to whatever you want. I'll click on continue, and then it's going to ask you to set a password for this account. So make sure to type in something strong. And then if you did need to view the password, you could click show password in clear for both options. But in my case, I know that I should be fine, so I'll click on continue. Next up is going to be configure the clock. So go ahead and choose the time zone that works best for you. Eastern is perfectly fine for me. I'll click on continue and then just be patient as it continues on with the whole process here. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, the route that we're going with this video is actually installing just Debian on the machine. We're not doing a dual boot scenario. We are strictly making this just a Debian machine, and that is it. I do plan to create another video which will show how to set up dual booting between having Windows and Debian on the same exact machine. But anyhow, for this video, let's use the down arrow and let's go with the guided use entire disk option. There are also the options of setting up LVM and also encrypted with LVM. You can feel free to do research on the side if you feel as though LVM is right for you. And then there is also the option to choose a manual method, which is going to go through a series of steps where you have to manually set the partitions and the sizes and all that good stuff. But usually guided use entire disk works for most people. So we'll click on continue, and then you should see your drive listed of the machine. In my case, I have a 500 gig solid state drive. So that is already highlighted. Here is the thumb drive that I have plugged in. I'm not going to highlight that. We'll click on continue. I am going to leave all files in one partition recommended for new users. There's separate home partition, there's separate home, var, and temp partitions, and then there's even separate var and serve and SRV swap for 1 GB for servers. And then there's also the small disk less than 10 GB partitioning scheme. Like I said, we're just going to leave it as the recommended option. We'll click on continue. And then this is just a preview of what is going to be changed. So if everything looks good in this portion, which to me everything looks perfectly fine, then we will click on continue. Once again, also just to mention is that we are going to nuke all the data on the machine. So if there's anything you need to back up on the machine before you go through this process, then please do so and then go right through the steps that we did previously. Anyhow, I don't have any data that needs to be backed up, so I'll click on continue. And then here's the warning saying it's going to delete the data on the hard drive. Anyhow, I'm perfectly fine with that, so we'll select yes, click on continue, and then just wait for this to work its magic. And it will take a little bit of time, so just be patient. Next up is going to be configuring the package manager, and this is basically pointing us in the direction of what archive mirror do we want the operating system to choose to pull from. In my case, I'm going to just leave mine as United States. However, if you feel you need to change yours to any of the different ones, then feel free to. We'll click on continue. And then I'm just going to leave mine on deb.debian.org. That should do the trick. We'll click on continue. If you're behind a proxy, then you can feel free to change up your proxy configurations at this point. In my case, I am not behind a proxy, so I'll click continue and then just be patient again as it continues to work the magic. Next up is configuring the popularity contest, aka telemetry. So this basically is the opt-in, if you wanted to be able to send anonymous data back to distribution developers if you wanted to. I'm going to leave mine as no, but if you wanted to, you could change this to yes to, once again, give them telemetry data. Anyhow, I'll click on continue. All right, so at the software selection screen, this basically gives us the predefined collection of software that can be installed on the machine. Now, anything we choose or don't choose here can always be changed up after the fact. So if you choose something within here that you didn't actually want, or you didn't choose something at this point that you do want, then like I said, you can add it after the fact. So anyhow, because this video is going over not installing a desktop environment, what we're going to do is we're going to uncheck GNOME and we're going to uncheck the Debian desktop environment. So basically, you could leave everything as is. However, chances are that this is going to be a server of some kind and you probably want to access it remotely, and that is where SSH server does come in. I'm going to go ahead and check this. The installation steps do not change at all if you check this or don't check it. And like I said, if you end up not checking this, but you want SSH server to be available later on, you can always change it up after the fact. And you may also want to turn web server on if you're planning to use this as a web server. But for the video, I'm just going to check SSH, and like I said, uncheck GNOME and the Debian desktop environment. So with this all set, let's go ahead and click on continue. And then once again, just be patient. All right, if all goes well, we should see the finish the installation screen and installation is complete. If for some reason it errored out at this point, I would recommend just trying again. If it still errors out, then the other thing is, once again, was Windows Defender actually temporarily turned off and it potentially Pac-Maned the files as Rufus was working the magic. The other thing also is that it could also be that your USB thumb drive is just on the fritz, and it's always worth trying a different USB thumb drive. Sometimes different brand thumb drives can just act weird for some reason. Anyhow, go through kind of the steps that I'd mentioned and see if it makes a dent in the problem that you're seeing. But anyhow, in my case, mine installed okay. So I'm going to click on continue. And then what I'm going to do is, as soon as it goes back to my post screen, aka my Lenovo screen or whatever brand yours is, I'm going to pull the thumb drive. So I just pulled the thumb drive, that way it doesn't accidentally boot off of it again, and we'll hopefully have it booting off the main drive here shortly. So you'll see grub pop up. I went ahead and just moved the up down arrows just to go ahead and change it up. However, just to show you that the default is booting from Debian GNU Linux. There's the advanced option for Debian GNU Linux, and there's the UEFI firmware settings. Anyhow, I just wanted to mention that, but we can up arrow to the very top again and hit enter to continue on the process of booting the machine. And then here we are. We have a fully functioning minimal installation or command line installation of Debian 13. So at this point, feel free to dig in. Feel free to use one of my server guides to build up a Debian server, of whether it's a game client or some application server, or if you've got something else in mind, definitely dive into it. Or if you actually want to use this as more of a daily driver desktop kind of machine, then you can always load a desktop environment on this. So that's all you need to do to get Debian 13 Trixie running with a minimal command line environment. If you found this video to be useful, please like it and subscribe to my channel to keep up on my latest video happenings. I also invite you to check out my channel if you haven't already, as it has many interesting guides and many more to come. Anyhow, until next time, take it easy.